Chapter 24.
Gary lay back in the marble bath, luxuriating in the feel of the warm water against his skin. Reluctantly, he climbed out and dried himself with a heated towel which Sa had thoughtfully provided from the outfitting computer. "Hey, Doctor, how about a nice steak dinner now?" He grinned over at the portly scientist who was busy packing gear in the duffel bag that lay next to their scuba suits. "Sounds great, my boy," the doctor replied. "See if the food master can provide it. I'll join you in a bit. I've got to talk to Sa first." The little expedition had been back in Hod for only a few hours, and Gary knew that Gaia and his companions must even now be wandering through the city, which was to be their new home, gaping at its wonders. He donned his scuba suit with a contented sigh. Jordan had wandered in from his own apartment and now leaned lazily against a wall, waiting for his brother. "What a relief to get out of that fire suit," he murmured. "Great thing, but I'll settle for normal temperature any day. Think of it, kiddo. In a few hours, we'll see the sun again. Come on, Jody, let's get some steak, if we can, in this vegetable heaven." Gary zipped the neck of his suit and they strode off down the corridor to the Foodmaster station. After a luncheon of authentic-tasting vegetable steaks, Sa called them all together for a final meeting at the small office he maintained in the power station. "There are some last matters we must discuss before you return to the surface world," he began. "When you leave Hod, you will take with you some knowledge which can be a potential danger to the future security of our city. I know you must be aware of this, even as Ganyu was." He hesitated and Dr. Shaw took the opportunity to express his own sentiments. "I know what's troubling you, Sa," the doctor said. "Once our people learn of your existence, there is the probability they will want to know more. You're afraid, and rightly so, that they will attempt to come here and exploit you." Sa smiled. "You're reading my mind, Shaw." The doctor grinned in return. "A pretty obvious conclusion. And I can't say I disagree with you either. The brief history of the human race isn't much to brag about. We're an odd animal. Half curiosity and half aggression." Sa's face became serious. He studied the half-spread tips of his fingers, tapping them against the desk before him, and replied, "I know quite a lot about the human race now, Shaw. Remember that your sessions in the inductor chair served a double purpose. You gained knowledge of our culture and I probed the smallest corners of your minds." He shook his great head sadly. "All those wars, the wasted efforts to play God, the brutal killings that had no purpose beyond animal savagery. And mingled with these primitive urges were the faint stirrings of higher thoughts. Perhaps you humans will mature in time, but that day lies far in the future, my friend." He paused and swept a hand toward the large windows which looked out upon the massive banks of machinery which filled the power station. "Hod is the result of millions of years of evolution. When we vanished from the surface of the earth, the world was plunged back into darkness. Our secrets have lain safely hidden ever since. And, sure, your people are not ready to share them. So, you see, we must take steps to ensure both our own safety and your own." The doctor swallowed hard and his face flushed. "I suppose you're right. What are you trying to tell us, Sa? Are you going to keep us prisoners or kill us?" The lizard man sighed. "Suspicion again, Shaw. One more constant failing of the human mind. No, you will be free to go. The safety measures that I will take are more impersonal. They are to... First, let me show you know what is going to happen a few minutes after you are safely returned to the surface of the sea." He got up and went to a square panel on the wall of the office. The face of the panel slid open at his touch and a black button was revealed to their eyes. 30 minutes from the time you surface, I will press this control. When I do, the entire city of Hod will descend into the Earth's mantle. Another control will then fuse the ocean's floor solidly shut above it. We will be lost to you from then on, perhaps forever. Maybe one day far in the future we will return to the surface, but by then thousands of years will have passed and your legends about Hod may be forgotten. And when we do come, it will be as friends to a world which will have matured far beyond its present level." The doctor lowered his head in embarrassed acknowledgement that what Sa stated was true. The second safeguard has already been taken, Shaw. Your knowledge of our science and customs, even the understanding of our language, will cease before you leave Hod. This has been a temporary gift to you, for I arranged it when you each submitted to the inductor. As you go from the city, an electrical impulse will cancel these memories. All that will remain is a vague recollection of the past few days. Dr. Shaw started to protest, but Sa raised his hand for silence. I am sorry, Shaw, but that is how it must be. I won't prevent you from remembering that you came, but the specific knowledge belongs to my world, not yours. And now, it is time for us to say goodbye, my friends. The lizard man held up his hand in a final salute and led them toward the elevator. Gary looked up at the immense banks of glowing machinery which lined the main corridor of the power station. As they were about to leave the building, he saw that his companions too were hesitating on the threshold. As they walked, Stan asked, waving his hand in a sweeping direction, "What will happen to all this now? And to the others?" He stooped by the entrance to the elevator, picking up his gear and slinging his oxygen pack across his shoulders. "Gaia and his companions from Garn will remain here. We will begin a new life together. I will teach them, and when the time is right we will return to Garn for the next step in our undertaking." "And that is?" the doctor asked. "We will not abandon those people. One day we will take them all back with a quantity of Vastix gas. We will put all Garn to sleep, then select additional citizens for transfer to Hod. The remainder will be left as they are. I know this may seem callous, even cruel to you, sure, but that is the way it will be. Hod has survived for 100 million years by employing these standards. We, after all, are not like you." At his signal, they entered the elevator. The crystal door slid shut. One moment remained for a last salute to the lizard man, then Dr. Shaw pressed the control button and they slowly rose from the concourse toward the domed ceiling. "Goodbye," Laurie breathed, watching the tall figure below gradually diminish in size. Now they had reached the airlock and the car stopped. "Put on your diving masks," Dr. Shaw ordered. "I'm going to flood the chamber. Stan, you lead the way back to the surface." They switched on their underwater flashlights and Gary felt the familiar pressure against his eardrums as water rose around him. Stan located the control which opened the upper end of the airlock and they waited until the passage was filled. Then they started up the shaft through the murky water. Emerging from the hole in the cliffside, they were once again on the ocean bottom. Faint light filtered down from the surface some 60 feet above. Stan reached into his belt and took out the signal transmitter which would advise Professor Kincaid they would soon be surfacing. He turned it on. Gary was the last to leave the tunnel. He turned for a final look backward toward the unseen city and a sudden wave of vertigo swept over him. Grabbing at the tunnel wall, he steadied himself. What had happened? For a brief moment his thoughts seemed to tumble crazily. There was something he wanted to remember, but what was it? "Come on, Gary." The words echoed in his ears with an odd, burbling sound and he saw that Stan had momentarily taken his mouthpiece from his lips and was waving at him. To make sure that he understood, the diver swam back and tugged at his arm. Gary reluctantly stepped out of the tunnel mouth and joined him. Laurie had already started up the line which led to the surface. The others followed in single file. They broke the surface water and bobbed into bright sunlight. Gary pulled off his face mask for a moment and blinked in the dazzling brilliance. "Wonderful," he shouted. A little while later, the Cartwright hove into sight, a quarter-mile to the north. Patiently they watched it approach. Then they were crawling up the rope ladders. "Welcome aboard." Professor Kincaid clapped Gary on the back with one frail hand and then excitedly turned to the hulking figure of the doctor. "We've been looking for your signal for the past 2 days. Where in blazes have you been anyway?" "Been?" Dr. Shaw rubbed his wiry beard with a weary gesture and spat overboard, glad to be relieved of the rubber mouthpiece. "We've been off to see the wizard. The wonderful Wizard of Ooze," Gary chuckled, his thoughts again flashing back to the murky sea bottom. "Well, come on down to the galley and tell me all about it," Professor Kincaid demanded. "We can get something hot for you while you're talking. First, I've got to tell the captain to get this old tub away from here. Dr. Shaw yelled. And in a hurry. Captain Lang had just emerged from below decks as he said this, and the doctor repeated his urgent warning. I'll explain later, but crank up every knot of speed you've got. He waved his arm out to sea. That direction. Stay clear of the shore or we'll get beached for sure. The converted minesweeper groaned under the unaccustomed speed as they fought their way through the choppy waves. How much longer? Captain Lang growled. The doctor's reply was lost as the surface of the sea suddenly took on a terrifying appearance. A short distance astern, it seemed to tilt downward in a great swirl of waters. It was as if a gigantic, unseen hand had slammed down and punched a hole in the sea. A fearful rumbling echoed against the New England cliffs as the surface of the Atlantic formed a monstrous whirlpool that seemed capable of sucking the Cartwright straight to the bottom. Captain Lang clung to the bridge. The ship wallowed crazily. Great waves slapped together, tossing spray in solid sheets that threatened to swamp them. The vessel pitched several times, then finally slowed its wild gyrations, and the sea gradually returned to its relative calm. The crew members slowly climbed to their feet. What in the name of heaven was that all about? Professor Kincaid groaned, tenderly nursing a bruised elbow. Dr. Shaw stared out at the water, watching the last turbulence subside, and with it their final tie to a world whose memory was already dimming in his mind. For the first time in more than a week he took up his pipe and thoughtfully sucked the stem. "Who'd believe the things we've seen?" Gary said. "Who indeed?" The doctor quietly replied. "Well, at least I've got this." Gary held up his camera. He slowly rewound the film cartridge and carefully removed it from the camera. 70 pictures to prove we're not spinning the wildest yarn since Jules Verne. And we've our reports on SAR back at the lab, some movie film you shot in the cave too. The doctor continued to chew on his pipe. "Wish we could have brought back more of a record. But, of course, we didn't know we could never return there." They went below and joined the others in the galley. Professor Kincaid kept burbling excitedly for information. Jordan listened to the conversation for a while, then quietly slipped away. Gary noticed that he had a familiar small package in his hand. Evidently Professor Kincaid had returned the little statuette to his older brother. Later, he knew, they would have to decide what to do with the priceless diamondite carving. Probably give it to the museum for safekeeping and display, he supposed. Jordan made his way to his cabin and sat down. With trembling fingers, he opened the box and removed the statuette. He placed it on the table before him and studied the strange writing across its base. Only an hour ago he could have read the symbols as easily as a first-grade primer, but now they had become meaningless. He'd always intended to have SAR explain the significance of this little gift from a world a million centuries removed. It was too late now. He watched the late afternoon sunlight sparkle across the exquisite carving. Was it SAR himself? An idol from a time long forgotten even by the people of Hod? The answer lay somewhere below his feet, he knew, down beneath the restless waves and a mile of ooze and rock. Someday, perhaps 1,000 generations from now, the answer might be known. He patted the statuette wistfully and murmured to himself, "Little fellow, what do you know?"